Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Nice Hour on Adobe Live. I'm Matt Alagaya. I'm the editor of It's Nice That, dialing in from a slightly stormy northeast London this time. What a difference a week makes. Welcome back to anyone who joined last Monday and to any regular Adobe Live viewers as well. If you weren't with us for either of the last two sessions, then welcome to you also. The Nice Hour, if you don't know, is a series of advice-led events from It's Nice That hosted on Adobe Live, offering you the chance to receive some expert creative guidance from some of the industry's leading practitioners. Last week, I spoke to the design legend Eric Hu about using typography meaningfully in design projects. And today, I'm really delighted to be joined from Johannesburg by the illustrator and artist Karabo Poppy Moletsane. Hey, Karabo.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm all good, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm loving the large Lego blocks in the background.
Thank you. I keep my supplies in there, like art supplies and stuff.
Oh, so good. Yeah, I think that's the best background we've had so far. So Karabo and I are going to be with you for the next hour up until 1 p.m. British Standard Time. And today we're looking at illustration and particularly the importance of color and pattern within this medium. Karabo has, over the course of her career, developed a really bold and unique illustrative style, one which has garnered fans around the world and commissions for big brands, including Nike and Google, although that's a very small list and it could be much more exhaustive. Karabo, before we dive into the 5 portfolios we're talking about today, I just had a very quick question for you, really, which is, where do you reckon your passion for illustration stems from? I mean, where does that come from in your life?
So I've always been the kid that always drew. I would much rather prefer staying in instead of playing outside, and my mom would buy me a bunch of crayons and Koki pens and I would just draw pretty much every day. I remember going into school, starting the first grade, and there was an art competition open from ages 7 to 13. And I actually won the competition and I couldn't believe it, being a 7-year-old against 13-year-olds submitting art. And then that's kind of where I got the idea that I might be good at this, and just that's kind of carried on throughout my schooling career and ended up bringing me into visual communication. But it was a little bit of a rocky journey because my family wasn't really excited about me going into a creative career. They kind of always associated that with a hobby, something that you did on the weekends, even maybe a side job, but it wouldn't be the main focus. So it caused some tension within the family. But after some time, my parents came around. And growing up, I just had no idea that there was this world of illustration and graphic design. And I'd always seen this kind of media, and I never really thought I could be one of the people creating it. So when I finally learned about that in high school, it was an easy transition for me going into that and learning illustration and putting a part of home and my narrative within this media that I loved so much.
Amazing, thanks. Yeah, I hope that I'm sure that'll be fairly familiar to a lot of people watching today who are in the similar boat. I guess this is how the next hour is going to play out. So ahead of our chat today, we asked budding illustrators and artists from the It's Nice That audience to submit illustration projects for Karabo to discuss and advise upon. And that's basically what we're going to be doing for the next hour. We've got 5 portfolios to go through in total across the next hour. So we'll be spending around 10 minutes discussing each one. I'll also be asking any questions that you have in the audience. So please do feel free to submit these via the Discord chat. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and asking any questions of Karabo as they pop up. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please do head over to Behance so that you're able to submit a question. It's also worth saying, though, that Karabo and I will both be joining the Discord channel at the end of this hour to answer any further questions that we don't have time to answer during the next 60 minutes. So do please stick around after the event today, and we'll be on there and we'll hopefully continue the discussion. Thanks for bearing with me, everyone, and Karabo included. It's time now, I'm very excited to say, for our first portfolio. So we have first up Milena Buchholz, who is a freelance illustrator, visual artist, and graphic designer based in Paris. She submitted a range of different pieces displaying a really bold and distinctive style. Karabo, I guess first of all, what did you make of this portfolio? Very, very kind of general, open question to start with.
Yeah, but as soon as I saw Milena's work, I was just really drawn to their use of gradients. It's something that's not super organic, but Milena applies it to very organic shapes, and it's just really interesting. It creates a new dimension within the works. I always get really drawn to how people draw other people and draw hands. I've always found hands to be one of the more difficult things to draw. So how illustrators kind of stylize that is like super exciting. And seeing how Milena's done it, like really, like caught my eye. And what I just really loved, it was like unexpected use of color was like something that I saw immediately within this portfolio. And I just really love seeing some of their colors like create some beautiful tension. It's not colors that I think a lot of people would have associated together, but then there's like this beautiful tension between the illustrations. And I was looking at some of the illustrations and it felt like it created like a nice border as well. So it's like the illustrations feel very considered with the kind of frame that they're in. So they fill up the frame really nicely. And I was just like really drawn to how they do that. And just like this use of like texture and like gradient within it, I just thought it was really beautiful. And I just love how it works with all the other illustrations. If you go back to the first one, what I really, really love is when people have interesting cropping as well. And I just love to see illustrations that have the unexpected. I think like being an illustrator, that's something that you can really appreciate within other people's work. And you always want to create something that someone hasn't seen before. I mean, that's why people draw. They're trying to create their perception of something and trying to show me what they have in their head. And this was just like one of my favorite illustrations that they've created. Interesting cropping, unexpected color use, like beautiful texture. This is like one of my favorite ones. And it feels very iconic to this person's style. And I love seeing iconic styles as well. So I really love this. Something else that I was thinking, I would love to see Milena's take on typography. I think in general, as an illustrator, it's really important to have a way that you apply your style to many different things. I think that's what helps with helping you become a candidate for almost any kind of project. So that makes you more likely to get a lot of jobs because people are able to see how your style could translate into a vision that they have. So I'd be really excited to see how Milena kind of shows us like typography. Seeing more pattern in their work would be really nice. And seeing also portraits, it would be really, really exciting to see how they apply this kind of approach to like creating shadows and depth within their illustration to some of those aspects. So I really, really love their work.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful work. I mean, one thing you mentioned right at the top there was the kind of color palettes. And I think I'm just really curious to hear from you, kind of how do you go about choosing a color palette, you know, that works for the particular project that you're working on? I mean, you have quite a distinctive color palette, I would say, but how much is there kind of room for experimentation there? And what is the kind of, I guess, when do you decide what it's going to be for the project?
So when I started with illustration, I found choosing a color palette to be a little bit tricky because I wanted to make it unexpected, but in the unexpected, you still want it to be pleasant. So I found color choosing really difficult. A lot of people had suggested Adobe Cooler to kind of help with color picking. But what I gravitated towards and what helped me come up with, I've got like a few color palettes that I often use and will just like interchange between projects. But I'd always been an artist that wanted to use as many disciplines to help elevate my illustration. So photography was super important for me. So I'd go out into the city all over where I thought there were like beautiful representations of my country. And I would just like take a ton of photos of what I thought like were beautiful representations. And part of that is like color use and just taking beautiful colors and then kind of use the eyedropper tool on some of those colors, change the saturation and use a little bit, and then come up with my own color palette based on different pictures that I'd taken. And then that kind of created something super unique. I hadn't seen people use those kind of colors together. And that's how I grouped my color palettes. So they were often based on a bunch of photos that I had taken, just going out in the world and just seeing something that I thought was beautiful and then kind of changing the colors from there. And it would be interesting to see how people kind of take that same approach and kind of show the colors that came out of like a part of their city. And I think that also adds like another like conceptual dimension to your illustration as well. So I love these colors, and I find it very difficult to find unique colors that are still pleasant, but that's how I had gone about it.
That's a great tip. I think, I don't know how many people do that, but it's a great tip for finding the best color palette for a piece of work. I love that. One thing I also wanted to talk about, and kind of in reference to Milena's work, but more generally as well, is about subject matter. Now, obviously, when you are working for a client, you have a client, you can't really choose the subject matter. That's going to be fairly dictated for you. But when you're doing personal works, when you're doing, passion projects, how do you pick something that you kind of want to do as a subject matter? I'm just thinking, Milena seems to be quite consistent in terms of these natural plant shapes, hand spaces. I mean, I guess the bottles on the left are maybe slightly unusual in that sense, but can you see any, is there any tip for kind of how you pick a subject matter that's kind of dear to you?
I think with illustrators and artists in general, it's really important to kind of there's like 6 top subject matters that I think circulate a lot within artworks. Portraits are really important. Also like side profile and forward profile of portraits. Seeing typography is really important. Animals, nature. I hope I don't forget the rest. Oh yeah, full body figures. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, landscapes. Right. I don't have like an acronym or a rhyme to remember all of them, but those are like the top 6 subject matters that we see circulated. And I think it's important for not just for Milena, but for all kinds of artists or illustrators that have a portfolio to kind of look at the top 6 subject matters and see if their portfolio kind of touches on each one of those. Like I said, that opens up to a lot of possible projects that people can kind of email you to be a part of. But I kind of circulate between all 6. I really love portraits and showing like side profiles and full body figures, but I try and keep it as diverse as possible. So I just cycle between the 6 and try and find new ways to do each of the 6 top subject matters.
Amazing. We've had a question come in from Simone, which is over the Discord channel. And this is kind of a bit more about how you kind of build a career, I guess. But she says, do you recommend joining an agency in an early stage of a freelance illustration career? How did you approach clients in the beginning of your career? So I guess it's kind of in those early stages, what are those first steps? Is an agency a helpful thing, or can you do it on your own? I guess, just some thoughts.
Those early steps are really difficult, and that's kind of when you have to do something right the first time around, as to not be in like stage 1 for very long. I think I can only share what my experience was. As soon as I graduated, I freelanced for an agency for a while. And while I was there, I just felt like it wasn't really the environment for me. I really wanted to build something very specific to myself, and that was like preserving the African aesthetic. And at the time, I found it too difficult I couldn't find an agency that had that as their focus. So I decided that the only way that I could forward this vision that I had would be to do it myself. So that's when I started freelancing, but I really didn't know anything about freelancing. That was never my plan in the beginning. So I then had a little bit of an internship with a freelancer to kind of learn how they do things. And I found that was extremely helpful. That was more helpful for me than going to the agency. And I felt like I learned a lot more from the freelancer than I did in the agency. So I feel it's really difficult. I don't think there's a right way or wrong way to go about it. This is just how I went about it. I feel like if you have freelancing in mind, I think it would be helpful to learn from other people freelancing. If you would like to be at an agency, like your end goal is to be at an agency, then it makes sense being at an agency. But people that haven't decided on either one yet, I think what would be important is if you maybe get an internship at a smaller agency. The less people, it means that more people have more jobs to do. You won't find one person that only does that one thing. And I find that you learn a lot in smaller agencies or interning with a freelancer than you would at a big agency. And I think that will help people decide in what direction they go in. So it really does depend on what the end result is, but I don't know that there's like a set formula. If you do this, it will 100% work. But that's what I did and what I would suggest.
Great. No, it's good to hear the personal experience. That's always useful.
It was difficult though.
I'm sure.
It was difficult.
I don't think anyone finds it easy, that first step, but no, that's great to hear your experience. We're going to have to leave it there and go on to portfolio number 2. So this is
amazing.
Camila Nogueira, a freelance illustrator who's currently taking online classes, so has actually never had a kind of proper portfolio review. She told us that she's now at a stage with her practice where she feels confident enough to receive some constructive feedback. And I think it's worth saying, I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with this, Karabo, but it's kind of a massive well done really to Camila, because I think it's never easy to put yourself out there and ask for feedback, but it's a huge part of being a successful creative of any kind of medium, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. Camila, this was extremely brave, and I think it is an important part of growth as well. So well done. But when I saw Camila's portfolio, I was really taken aback. I was like, this is incredible illustrations. And like, it is very unique to have someone that's like starting with something and you can really kind of see their style come through. I think there's like beautiful, delicate line use, and that kind of delicate nature kind of goes into like all her illustrations as well. You can go to the next slide. Sorry, I already know how the slide goes.
That's great.
So I don't know if people knew that, but it's not the first time I was seeing it. But just seeing how this style is like easily carried through all of her illustrations, it was truly like really beautiful to see. And it just also shows that going to university or going to a college isn't the only option that people can do. There's incredible resources like Camila has made use of, like online classes, and produced such amazing work. Camila, I first wanted to say, I think your style is beautiful. How you approach color and how you approach line is extremely delicate, but it feels super considered. You repeat a lot of your colors really nicely, and it creates like a beautiful flow. It almost feels like how people create like tattoo sleeves and bodysuits of tattoos. It's like considered from top to bottom. There isn't a space within any of her artworks that I think wasn't meticulously considered, especially in the city scenes in the previous slide.
Yeah, we can go back. Like
everywhere you look, it feels like so considered. There's like beautiful detail, but it's still like so subtle and like amazing to look at. I think one of the things that came through was Camila wanting to know how she could probably make her illustrations bolder. And I think what could help is we see a lot of like the same angles that she's drawing from. So I think what could make it bolder, I don't think, Camila, you should change your line use. I think it's super delicate and beautiful and like I think iconic to you. So I think if you stay with that would be perfect. But what would be interesting is if you look at the angle in which the viewer is looking at your illustrations. It feels very eye level or like slightly raised. And I think what would be interesting if you maybe look at like comic books and graphic novels, there's like really exciting positions that you see the characters and scenes in. It feels like super exaggerated and like almost bringing in movement and action. I think that would help like with making your illustrations like that much bolder. And it would be interesting to see this kind of style in a very like exaggerated comic book kind of feel. It would be amazing to see like that typography as well. In the city scene, it makes sense how this is like a representation of maybe a photo. So it's like very exact to that scene, but it would be amazing to kind of see your typography take the same kind of feel. But if we kind of saw like temples in a super exaggerated, like camera below kind of thing, I think that will make it extremely bold and like extremely dynamic as well. And I think I'm going to mention tattooing again, but like what tattoo artists also do to kind of bring the color forward is make use of black. I think black might be a little bit too harsh, but if you open up in Illustrator or Photoshop and have like the colors there, if you're maybe on the blue, if you take the blue as close to black as possible, but you're still able to see the blue, if you bring that black into some of the shadows, I think it will make the colors pop even more, but still keeping it super delicate. And I think that could make it like super bold and exciting. But I think you're already on the right track, and I love the illustrations I've seen.
Yeah, no, it is. It's an amazing portfolio. I mean, these few that we've got here really show her style beautifully. One thing I was going to say is, I mean, you obviously mentioned color quite a lot there, and there's some really good tips on how to kind of, I guess, boost the contrast a little bit by using some darker colors. Do you think, I mean, it's obviously quite a consistent color palette of blues and pinks in that kind of world. Do you think it could be a bit too consistent, or actually is there a really good case for, you know, having a consistent color palette that people recognize is kind of your own?
I think it is a good thing to have a distinct color palette, but I think you could be doing yourself a disservice if you do it too much. I think, especially if you think of how your website or Instagram grid will look, some of the beautiful illustrations I think could get drowned in when you see them all together. So right now we're seeing them individually and they really stand out. But I think if you're looking at a full portfolio of all the illustrations and they have the same color palette, then it's almost like people might overlook how amazing some of the illustrations are because it all kind of blends in and looks the same. So I think it's great to have that palette. But like I've done with myself, I have like quite a few palettes that I just interchange. So I feel like I'm not removing myself from having that palette. What I'm doing is just adding. So people would be able to recognize my work by a number of palettes. So I think that's like really good. What Matt just mentioned now, it would be good to have a palette, but even better if you have like a few other palettes and just interchange between them. Like, don't throw this palette away because I think it's really good. But I want people to be able to appreciate your work in its fullness. And I think some diversity within that would be really important.
Absolutely, it's a great answer, and I think it leads me on to actually a question that we've had from the audience. You mentioned there that, you know, your Instagram is a big part of kind of marketing yourself, and you know, you don't want it to look kind of too samey if you have the same kind of color palette across everything in your grid. We've got a great question here. What's your opinion on using social media to promote your work? Is the number of followers you have important, or should we actually just, as creatives, not care about this too much? I mean, you obviously are very good at using social media in your own kind of promotion, I guess.
I do enjoy it a lot. I remember when I started freelancing, I just thought like I didn't really have the budget to get someone to help me create a website. I was working on like still student budget, even though I had graduated. And I thought social media was free. Behance was free. So this was a great way to market without paying anything. And what it did was help me reach markets that I myself felt like I didn't have direct access to. So using social media, I think, is really good because it takes you to places that I feel physically it will be more difficult to getting your work internationally really helps. Like, social media really helps with doing that. I think it is important now. A lot of people, even companies, are present on social media. A lot of people kind of look at like getting, like, I don't want to say verifying, but they're kind of looking at, like, I think if a website is not enough, they kind of want to see how you, I think it's just important seeing how people are able to communicate on different platforms. I think if people employ a freelancer, they're not just employing someone to just illustrate, but often they're trying to look at how you think and approach everything. So I think something that my mom always used to tell me, everything about you says something about you. So this is just another aspect to kind of say something about how you work or something about your work. And why not use social media? Because it's got tremendous reach and it's free also. So it's like that kind of reach for almost paying nothing. I think it would be good for people to look into. When it comes to like amount of followers, I don't think that's important. What's important is just like how you present your work there, how the grid looks, because that is saying something about how you arrange things. That is saying something about how you, like, do you think of something holistically, or do you think of something like very focused and narrow. And I think from someone's social media, if you're looking for a creative to come in on a project, that is something that your social media will say. I think it just gives people a look into either yourself or your work. So it would be important to use it. I don't think the amount of followers work, like that is important. I think that's important if you may be going into influencer work, but as an illustrator or an artist or a creative, followers don't really matter, but how you arrange your feed and grid and how you present yourself, I think will say something about you or your work, which is always good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. I mean, if I was going to add just one thing, I think, the number of followers is probably not important. I think if you have, 5,000 followers who are really passionate about your work and advocates for you, I think that's probably more important than having 50,000, but they,
exactly,
they're not super engaged in what you're doing. So I think it's misleading to just look at that top line figure of, how many tens of thousands of followers you have. I think it's important if they are engaged in what you're doing and interested in what you're doing as well. If I can add my 2 cents.
I love your 2 cents, my friend. It's always welcome.
Thanks very much. It's time, I think we need to move on to our third portfolio today. So this is Nicola Magri, an Italian designer who operates an illustration practice on the side, although he says he'd love to make illustration his kind of full-time pursuit. I guess then a bit of a first question, Karabo. I mean, what did you make? Yeah, just kind of broadly, I guess, what did you make of this portfolio? I mean, there's lots in here, lots of variety.
It's super diverse. The first thing I thought of when I looked at Nicola's work, I was like, what program are you using? I just really like, it's just super unexpected. I was like, this could have been Illustrator, this could have been Photoshop, this could have been Procreate, this could have been anything. And I think that's really special to see. And if people aren't able to see oh, that's a vector illustration, it feels like people would just, kind of chop it up to one thing and then move on to the next. But here it kind of forces the person to keep looking in and trying to figure out things within their work. And I think that's a really great skill to have. I don't think that happens a lot. So I think, Nicola, you've definitely got something really special within this. And it almost reminds me of old school illustration storybooks, how the color palette works. It's it's very muted, but it's very difficult to kind of explain it, but it feels nostalgic. It feels a little bit aged. There's a maturity about it that I really like. There's a very light texture that's also there. It's almost adding grain or fade into a photo. So it's really, really beautiful to see. And it feels like these kinds of illustrations that Nicola created could work as standalone artworks, but also editorial illustrations. So seeing how your work can apply to many different platforms, I think is a really, really great skill to have within your portfolio. It's really beautiful. There's a realism in it as well. I don't know, the diversity is something that really excited me about Nicola's portfolio. And also the beautiful perspectives as well. That's this is a really difficult skill to achieve in illustrations, but Nicola, you just do it so seamlessly, and I think that's so great. That's definitely something that I think you can keep on doing within your portfolio. If we can go one slide back.
So this one?
Yes, this one here. I think what would be really nice, Nicola, sometimes your illustrations are quite simple, and I think you would do yourself a great justice if we can see how your personal use of line works. I think I can't remember where I heard this, but someone once told me something really exciting about an illustrator is seeing their unique approach to line and how they use and manipulate line to either create texture, to create depth, contrast. So it would be interesting to see how specifically, Nicola, you use line and manipulate it into your work. I think it would create another dimension to this. You've already got beautiful perspective, beautiful stylization as well. And I'd be really excited to see individual lines and see how you approach more line within your work. I think it will make the illustrations jump out even more.
Fantastic. I think, I mean, one of the things you touched on already is this kind of amazing diversity in over the images that we've seen. And there's a real diversity of styles. I mean, as you said, these ones, you know, you could easily see these in Wired magazine or something like that. They feel very editorial. Some of them feel a bit more painterly. I guess, I mean, it's an intriguing question and something that we've grappled with, that it's nice that I never quite, you know, got to a conclusion on. But how important do you think it is to have a kind of unique style that really is recognizably yours? I mean, are clients looking for that unique style that is yours, or actually do some clients want a bit of a diversity of styles and think, okay, I can give this to Nicola because I know he can do 5 different things with it and he can give me 5 different options? I mean, do you kind of fall either side of that argument of how useful it is to have a unique style?
So I've also thought about this quite a lot. It's obviously like questions that people ask, and I feel it seems like my question is, when people ask, is it better to have one unique style or many styles? And I feel like my answer is yes.
Right.
So I think what's really important is both. I think illustration and creating art is like somebody's handwriting, and everyone's handwriting will be super unique, but someone is able to write in cursive, able to write all in capital letters, able to write in like lowercase letters, but it's still their handwriting. And I think the same approach would be important to illustration and artwork as well. Even though you have that overarching style that is yours, it's able to be applied to a lot of things. And it almost seems like it's a different style, but it's still you that's carrying it over into like different applications. So it's almost like you should have a style, but have many styles, if that makes sense. Or you're able to carry that one style into many things. I think it can be limiting if you only do that one style and you're never going to veer out of that. I approach freelancing and like building a business, like I'm trying to get as many of the jobs as possible that I would love to do. So I need to make myself almost like dating. You need to become everyone's type. So yeah, that gives you a larger fishing net, I guess. And when you have a lot of projects coming in, you're able to choose the projects that you specifically want, but you have to make yourself almost available to as many possible projects. And I think the key to doing that is being able to have a number of styles, or able to have one style that you can apply in many different ways.
Makes
so
sense.
My answer to that is yes.
Either or, yes.
Yeah.
No, it totally makes sense. I think, yeah, absolutely right.
Difficult one to explain, but I hope people can see where I'm going with it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's so true. I wanted to kind of dwell on these two that are on the screen now, because I think there's a really interesting quality here with the windows and the light streaming in from these windows in different ways. And it's a really interesting way that Nicola's kind of capturing light and shade and the colors. I mean, do you have any tips for, I guess, picking colors when you have differences in light, but maybe, you know, an environment like this that, has light and shade in it? I would imagine it's very difficult to pick colors when you have this kind of situation.
And also to make it look like that's what's happening. I think that's a really difficult skill to have. So like, this is amazing. I often don't show that much like light and shadow within my work. And I haven't done it for a long time. But I think if you're using, I often use Illustrator. So a lot of my like more technical tips would come from Illustrator. But if you try and look at different tints, I think that creates like a beautiful way to kind of show shadow in an unexpected way. So what it does is it doesn't just add like a percentage of black or gray to a color, but it almost considers the hues of the color a little bit more. And I think if you use the tint option or the tint menu bar within Illustrator, that will help with creating like shadows or highlights within work that is still like working with the current colors that you have. He can do something that I can't do. So I'm just in awe. And I think if people would like to try that, that would be a very interesting way to go about it. But Nicola, come give us your secrets.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Well, no, thanks very much. I mean, we've got time for just one very quick question before we have to move on. But this one comes from Camila, in fact, who was the last portfolio we looked at. And she says, do you think my portfolio is ready to start reaching out to clients, or should I explore a little more first? And I guess, I mean, just to make this a bit more general, maybe for the rest of the audience, when do you think a portfolio is ready to start approaching clients with? I mean, is there a risk that you do it too early and actually then it's not quite in the right place, or is it always a good time to be approaching clients? It's an interesting kind of question, isn't it?
Very interesting. Actually, no one has asked me this one before.
Right.
When is it a good time to approach clients, or when do you feel your portfolio is ready to approach clients? I think it's important if you have a good time to approach clients is when you have diversity within your portfolio. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be a mixture of your own personal work, but if you've had the opportunity to work with clients, it would be important to have that as well. So I think don't just have a portfolio that's just consistent, that only consists of personal work. Clients want to be able to see how you apply that to different scenarios, even if it's not like an actual client that you did work for. Maybe you're doing corporate identity. You can just invent a company and create a corporate identity and see how you're applying your creative thinking and creative output to like an external source. And this is how like the thinking and the rollout is going to be. So if you can just show that kind of application, like if you were working with a client, this is how it would look. I think clients or companies would want to see that. So I think your portfolio is ready, or you are ready to approach clients when you have a good balance of your own work, but also work that has like real life application as well, even if that's just made up, but they're able to see how you think. And I think that's when you're ready to go.
Fantastic. Yeah, even if you're setting yourself a kind of your own brief, really, just to kind of give yourself that opportunity to apply your work. I think that's a great advice. We do have to move on now, I'm afraid, to our fourth portfolio of the nice hour on Adobe Live. So fourth up, we have Simone Roberto, a Portuguese illustrator and tech consultant who describes the practice of drawing as her passion and her dream career. She was also born in South Africa, in Joburg, in fact.
Nice.
So there's a nice connection there as well. Karabo, I guess, what did you make of Simone's work and then these images on the screen now, but also the rest of the portfolio?
I really like Simone's work. What was really like unique to me was the simplicity, but how Simone was still able to create like such dynamic imagery within just using like simple lines. To be able to communicate this just with like maybe one continuous line is something like extremely difficult, but I still find like so much like energy and like movement within the work. So I think this is a really beautiful style, and I think styles always change throughout like many years, and I think this is an incredible style already. So I would suggest Simone keep with the style. I think it's reaching something super interesting, and I also see it being able to apply to like many things. It can be standalone artwork. It can also be like in editorial as well, but it can also be like, I see like giant murals done in the style as well. And it's really beautiful to see. I think what's really nice about this specific one with the two that we saw before, it was a black outline. And I think something really exciting happens when you have a colored outline, because it brings in like something a little bit more unexpected. A lot of the time, if you see a style that's similar to this, people would expect to see black line, but it's really nice to see how you use like colored line. I think like we spoke previously about the tint menu within Illustrator, what would be nice to see in your illustrations, if you use colored lines, to kind of use the tint option to kind of help you with what colors to use as the outline. It would be great to see like a tint of that purple color, a darker one being the outline for the pants and shoes, using another one to be like for the I don't know much about working out. Matt, you can help me. What are those weights called? Is it called a weight?
Yeah, good question. Like in a kind of dumbbell style thing.
Yeah. So you could use the tint to kind of have a different color for that. It would be amazing to see like different colors as the outlines, but colors that still like have harmony with the other colors that are within your illustration. I see that you haven't used green here, and it's really interesting to see the green. I think greater harmony could be achieved if you have a color that's just like a tint darker or lighter from the colors that you already have. I think it's beautiful. I think there's like really interesting stuff happening here, and it's a style that I haven't seen a lot. So it would be great for Simone to keep at this. Like this is like really, really beautiful to see. Like the simplicity, but it's just like so strong on its own. Also, there's like a lot of confidence that someone I think has, and that I want to commend Simone for having. I often I'm going to put a background, I'm going to put a color, I'm going to put a bunch of stuff. And it's just like amazing to see that you were so confident in your image that it could stand alone like that. And I think it does. I think if you go back to one slide, I think what could be interesting here is seeing some texture coming in. If you kind of break the solid colors with a bit of a texture. But Simone, I'm going to challenge you here. Don't just use the textures that are already within Photoshop or Illustrator or download a texture. What would be really nice with how simple everything is if you actually created a texture on your own. It's really nice seeing how people are able to play the digital with the more traditional together. So like how I created some of my illustrations was using like paint or ink and rolling it onto like a rubber sheet, and then taking that rubber sheet and pressing it against a piece of paper. If you scan that and then overlay it onto an illustration, it creates like beautiful textures that are like super unexpected. You're seeing like filled shapes, but right next to the filled shape is like this like movement of how the paint or the ink kind of interacted with the rubber and the paper. I think it would be great to see texture within this, but texture that's not as precise, because we have very precise lines and color use. It would be nice if we mix it with like something a bit more traditional.
Excellent. Yeah, I wanted to come back to this kind of first slide and these two really interesting illustrations. I mean, there's obviously some really interesting abstract shapes and patterns going on here. I guess I'm kind of curious to hear, do you think that's something that Simone could kind of work a bit more on and develop a bit further? Do you think that the abstract shapes and patterns, they're kind of bringing a lot to the work, or do they need to be doing more in terms of like what they're doing within that composition?
I think it works. I really love the abstract shapes, but I think sometimes they can take away from the illustration. So I think on the illustration on the right, the black and white one, the abstract shapes are used very minimally, and I think it adds to that. I think a little bit on the left, it may be taking away, because then you ask yourself, why is it there? Is it serving as a background, or is it something that's happening? Is it showing like train of thought, or is it echoing something else? So I think I really like the use of the abstract lines, but I think more subtle use would be nice, like how Simone has used it in the illustration on the right. I think what would be really nice as well is if we keep seeing more depth within the illustration. So we already see it here. There's like a foreground and it's moving into the background. It would be nice to see like a third aspect to the illustration, and then a little bit more of the abstract lines. Then it feels like they're communicating more together, where on the left, I feel like they're a little bit disjointed. But I think it's a really nice like element to have, but they're very tricky to use with organic shapes, because you need them to still communicate together and harmonize. They harmonize great on the right, and then there's like some trouble, I think, on the left.
Okay, interesting. That's great to hear. I also wanted to go just to this final one, which we touched on briefly, but I guess these are comic strips or they're kind of one panel comics. I mean, comedy and comics generally are quite tricky, aren't they? I mean, do you have any advice on how to how to improve, comedy within illustration. It's a really difficult thing. And so, some people do it very naturally, and some people struggle. It's almost like you have to be more of a comedian than an illustrator sometimes. Do you have any tips on kind of how to, I guess, build out and develop that side of the portfolio? Not an easy question.
I really like this. It's not something that you see a lot. And no, it's not an easy question. But I think it also depends on the kind of comedy. Sometimes having less in the illustration actually makes like the punchline funnier. And it really depends on the kind of comedy.
You can almost see these in the New Yorker or something, there's very
exactly
short, like spot illustrations that are one panel. I mean, I don't think I have the answer either. I've never thought about it too much, but it suddenly struck me that actually we don't see a lot of this kind of illustration out there in the world, and maybe it's because it's really difficult to get right, I guess.
I think so too.
Simone, I mean, well done for having this in your portfolio. I think it's really impressive.
I think something that could elevate it is if you have like illustrated type as like writing out the punchline. So we don't see it as like two separate images, but like comic books, it's like, it feels like it's merged. I think let's see what happens if you like illustrate the type like you did in the previous ones on the dumbbells. You had like work written in the dumbbells. And I think I'd be interested to see how, instead of having like a typeface like that, have your own illustrated type within it and see how that works.
That could be great. Yeah, I think it's time we're going to have to move on to our fifth and final portfolio. One thing on this I was wondering on Simone, though, is maybe there's an opportunity maybe to do more than one panel. So you could try something a bit more narrative that's 3 or 4 panels, and see if you can kind of build the comedy over a kind of a narrative that way. Could be something interesting to explore. But
that's a good one, actually. I like that.
Right, I think unfortunately it's time for us to move on, and this is now our fifth and final portfolio of the Nice Hour here on Adobe Live. It's Michelle Atayi, and she is a graphic designer and freelance illustrator based in France. Karabo, she says she's a huge fan of your work, your vision of art, and notes that you offer her confidence and motivation in her own creative practice every day, which is a lovely part of the submission.
Wow.
I guess we have, really bold illustration here in black and white, no color at the moment. But what did you make of Michelle's work and this portfolio?
I really, really like Michelle's work so much. And I think also very distinct style that you can see carried on throughout the portfolio, which is like really nice to see. But it feels like Michelle's found different ways of like communicating that style, which is something that's really good to have. That goes with the how I answered yes to that question. I thought it was so beautiful. It feels timeless and relevant all at the same time. So I think there's like great longevity that you could have with the style that you have currently. Also being like a Black illustrator, I want to commend you for that and like showing that kind of representation. So thank you for like, it's not just a portfolio that you're doing, but your existence is also adding to this, which is like really beautiful to see. And what I really love is like the diversity in the people that you draw is like really beautiful to see. And I think it's really important to show that within your illustrations. And I see that throughout your whole portfolio as well. And the black and white approach, I think, is actually really brave. I think a lot of illustrators immediately gravitate towards color and seeing how they can communicate with color. And I think this is something really brave and really strong to do just in black and white. I'm also going to say the diversity is definitely needed. It's really great that you have this black and white style, but it would be interesting and like so exciting to see like how you would approach color. I think it would be great for you. I think France has got incredible, like beautiful landscapes and architecture, and the colors that could arise from like taking photos and sampling those colors would be interesting to see how you could apply those colors to your illustrations as well. I think it's a really beautiful style. Also, something that I mentioned, you've got like a very loose line work, which is really interesting to see. Something that I wanted to say, I really like how it looks, and I think it would be exciting to see if you had lines that maybe tapered off and lines that were a little bit thicker, where you kind of create a shadow with your line, or like create a very deep crease in a shirt by having a thicker tapered off line would be also really interesting to see. But I really love your portfolio. I think I love the diversity in it, the confidence in it. You seem confident in your work, and it's really beautiful to see.
Totally, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think one thing that really struck me with Michelle's work is the faces and how kind of beautifully she captures faces. I think particularly, in this project and the first one that we came to as well, with a really interesting perspective, from obviously below the figures. I mean, I guess your faces are hard, I'm sure you'll know this as an illustrator, but you're fantastic at doing faces. Any tips on how to capture a face and I guess, portray it quite accurately for our viewers today?
Faces are difficult when you want to stylize them. So here we can see, like with Michelle's work, it is a very accurate portrayal of a face, but how Michelle's drawn it is in a very stylized way, and finding that balance is super difficult. But faces are tough when you stylize them. What advice can I give? To be honest, practice is going to be the best place to start. Like, really understand people's faces really well, really understand like the part between the eyes, the length of the nose. There's that figure drawing tip that a lot of people that went to art school kind of learn. The size of your eye is going to often be the size of your lips as well. The space between the hairline and where the eyebrows start is going to be the space between the bottom of the nose and the chin. So I think understanding the rules really well is only then that you're able to like break the rules a little bit, but it's still like is recognizably like a face and an appealing face. So I think if you learn those rules really well, it will help you in stylizing them, but it still looks like an appealing face, especially like in the, like here or the first one, like Michelle has used very simple lines, but because they have such a great understanding of how a face is structured, they're able to communicate that literally with 2, 4, 6, 7 lines. And it's like a beautiful, appealing face. And even in the first one, it's still also very minimal use of lines, but because she understands how the distances work between the facial features, she's able to capture that. So I think it maybe is not the most exciting way to approach it or the most exciting advice, but you do have to understand the rules really well so that you're able to break them, but still create like beautiful images from it.
And just one more question on Michelle's work. I think, I mean, you've mentioned that things that she could do to maybe, I guess, develop the work are try a bit of color and see, how that might be applied to the work. And then also using kind of maybe some thicker lines, particularly when I think you were talking about with this work, could we see a bit more kind of weight, I guess, in the line work? Are they kind of the two things that you would say would really be good to experiment with next?
I think those are the two things. I think also what would be nice is I would love to see how Michelle would approach animals, would approach like kind of the 6 subject matters that I said are often like cycled through illustrations, but also looking at depth. I want to be able to see like what's happening behind these figures or around these figures. It would be amazing to see how she tackles background. I think in the portfolio, the background was often very plain, and I think not as dynamic as the images in the front. And I think you create a very interesting illustration if you're able to still create a background that doesn't compete with the foreground, but still feels very intentional and thought out. So I think it would be interesting to see like some backgrounds and see how that kind of looks. I want to see some animals in there. I also want to see a bit more typography. We kind of saw it in the beginning, but it would be great to see how these kind of translate into typography too.
Amazing.
Also, where are the patterns? I would love to see how Michelle also like approaches pattern too.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think we had more pattern at the start of the hour, but it's kind of by the end it drifted off for sure. No, I think that's an absolutely it's great advice for Michelle. I think I hope that's useful for Michelle if she's watching. I guess I wanted to kind of finally, we're coming to the end of the hour, unfortunately, but I had one final question, which is really just about advice that you've been given that you think is kind of the most relevant for kind of any illustrators. I mean, I guess, you know, when you think back to learning about your craft and the people that have helped you over the years, and I'm sure every creative has those people who have kind of advised them and helped them over the course of their career. Is there one piece of advice that you've received that's kind of most helped you with your illustration and art practice, that someone's given you and you've thought, wow, that's really kind of changed the way I do things?
One.
Well, yeah, exactly. Maybe difficult to pick just the one.
Okay, let me see.
I mean, we could be going back to really early days, or any kind of time of your career.
Okay, can I give two?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Okay, one is more how I approach illustration within my head, and then one is more like the practical approach. But the first one is being like, don't be intimidated by how long it takes to feel comfortable and confident in how you illustrate, and how long it would take to maybe get the projects that you wanted, kind of get your name out there, maybe even get the recognition that you wanted as well. I think it can take a long time. Some people it takes like 6 months, and that's incredible, but those are the unique cases. I think most of the time it's something that could take a very long time, and I think people should never be discouraged or like intimidated by how long it could take and how difficult it is. So yeah, like trust the process, enjoy the process. There's a lot of growth and exciting things that happens in that process. And sometimes the process is even more important than the actual destination. But I think like it's important to like honor that time of waiting to get to where you want. And the practical advice that I got that I would like to share is like, it's always important to find what's unique about you as a person and show that within your illustrations. I think each person has got a really unique voice and narrative and background that they have that will never be exactly the same as somebody else's. So the thing that makes you unique, I think, show that within your work and play that up within your work. It creates another dimension to your work that I think people would admire and be drawn to. And yeah, I think people shouldn't be afraid to put themselves within their work and like their background and narrative, heritage, culture. But yeah, don't be afraid of putting what makes you unique and your narrative into your work. That was the most valuable advice that I ever got. And I pretty much did that. And that became often a lot of the reasons why people came to my work. And I think that helped elevate my work a lot more.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, two incredibly valuable pieces of advice to end on. And I'm afraid that is where we have to end. We've come to the end of our third and final edition of the Nice Hour on Adobe Live. It's been a genuinely, really fascinating chat with Karabo. And I think it's fair to say we've both been pretty overwhelmed by the quality of the portfolios we've seen. Isn't that right?
Right? Wow. Yeah.
Really
truly.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's great to see so many familiar names popping up in the chat and also some new ones as well. A special thank you to those of you who submitted your portfolios. As I mentioned before, you know, it's such a difficult thing putting your work up for criticism, and it's just commendable that you guys have done that. Even if your portfolios weren't chosen today, just well done for sending them in, and thank you for doing so. Before both Karabo and I head over to the Discord channel to answer any remaining questions that we haven't got around to answering today, I just want to say a final kind of colossal thank you to Karabo for her time today and fantastic advice and feedback. I mean, really, genuinely amazing stuff. Yeah, it's been very enlightening for me to listen to you, and I hope that's the same for our audience as well. finally, because this is our final session of the Nice Hour, just a huge thank you to Adobe Live for hosting us today and for the past 3 weeks. It's been amazing. We hope you found it insightful, enjoyable and inspiring as well. So that's bye from me and bye from Karabo.
Bye, guys.
Bye.